Guys, I think it's time for an honest discussion about the Mario Kart World Cup. As you all know, it is a very popular tournament with widespread appeal. Every time the World Cup happens, it seems that there's articles written about it from outside the community. It seems like it attracts the most outside observers. And I think this is largely because the tournament actually has rooting interest on the outside. A lot of people, can root for, a country they're from or a country that they like or something like that. And you don't really have to have an immediate connection with the players to take an interest to it from the outside. With that being said, we don't run the Mario Kart World Cup every year anymore. And I think a lot of people are starting to wonder, like, hey, what's the future of this tournament? I want to talk about, the ins and outs of the World Cup and what really goes into running one. And I will say right now, in regard to 2023, I don't know what's going to happen yet. This is simply because there's just a lot of factors to take into consideration. Running one of these events isn't, a super easy feat. A lot of preparation and planning has to go into it. We have to, discuss whether or not it's going to have a good effect on the community, if it's worth, the effort and the hassle, and like what are we going to get out of it as a scene. So without further ado, let's start talking World Cup. Now here's the thing. Unfortunately, it's a belief that the tournament's reputation may be a little bit greater than the tournament itself. There's a few reasons for this. The first really just goes over to imbalance. So I guess this is a pretty timely discussion right now, with the actual World Cup going on right now. Finals are coming up as of the time of me recording this video. But I think what makes the actual World Cup, so engaging is just there's like a belief that anybody truly can beat anybody. I don't know a ton about it, but I don't think Morocco, for instance, was, expected to make the semifinals, and I think that's kind of what is special about it in that regard. But when it comes to, our World Cup and Mario Kart 8, well, it's been all about 8 teams. All you have to do is look at the tournament history to really see this for yourself. The top 8, kind of like the prestigious final bracket, as you would say, is featured the same teams every single year, and there's only one exception, and that exception was the first year of the game, where one of those 8 teams just simply didn't have a roster that season. One thing we did in the 2021 World Cup is, divide it into multiple phases. Traditionally, we would have, your kind of superpowers, if you will, play in group phase like all the other teams, that are not expected to go nearly as far. And what that ultimately did was create a ton of uneven matches. Japan would beat somebody with 700 points scored every year, it felt like. Essentially, a lot of those matches just weren't a good use of time because the top 8 teams are, simply put, just so much further ahead of everybody else. And I think 2021 was a massive improvement just because it did kind of get rid of those blowout matches. But with that being said, they're not entirely gone. Running World Cup is tough also because we have to find a good place to put it. Usually when we run World Cup, it takes about a month or so, and that month is packed. Like, it is match after match, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So here's the thing. When we run World Cups, a lot of times we have not had MKU alongside it, and I don't think not having MKU running is a good idea really ever, because MKU is a very valuable tournament to us, especially when you get to consider that everybody or anyone can play in MKU. That's the type of tournament that we should really want to, emphasize for getting more people into the community. If we were to run it alongside MKU, it gets really difficult because one of the most desirable match times for people to play in is that MKU slot, 3 p.m. Eastern, and we don't have that to work with if it's running during World Cup. Additionally speaking, scheduling can become an absolute nightmare because of time zones and teams really every cycle being rather unreasonable with the times they can play. I obviously get it. Everybody wants to give their best crack at the World Cup. They don't want to not have their best lineup or anything. Something that happens every single time is you'll have this group and teams will give their availabilities, and the availabilities of one team just will entirely miss the availabilities of another. And pretty much what happens is we have to ask again or compromise on every single potential match, it feels like, because both teams want to play at a different time. And at that point, it's like you have to play the game of figuring out if they actually can't or if they would just prefer to play at this time. And it's a little bit of a mess when considering, all factors for, all groups, all games, etc. And it doesn't really just stop there, because the expectation is that we make a coherent stream schedule on top of it as well. I think World Cup's reputation really has come from the fact that back in 2015, the first one that we really went hard on with Endgame TV, they wanted to stream everything. And everybody's like, whoa, this is really cool. We're going to get featured on this big channel and everybody's going to watch because World Cup gets good viewership. And I think that's really exciting for people. But the community's grown since then. We have even more teams now, even more matches, and a lot of matches that aren't really super close. And we simply can't stream everything anymore. As a matter of fact, I don't think we can stream the majority. Getting stream teams historically for World Cup has honestly been a nightmare, and in the last one, it was even worse than normal. And usually, if we can somehow get through, it just cripples our team after the cup's over, because everybody's just so drained, because a few people really have to step up every cycle, just carry the load and make sure that everything is going to happen that has to happen. We don't like promising things that we can't deliver on, and it's not the best for the well-being of the people on our staff team, and that is honestly something we don't really want to negotiate with very much. We want everybody to have a positive mentality and not to be drained, because when your whole team gets drained, a lot of bad things happen as a result. Overall, I mean, between the scheduling and finding suitable times for everybody to play, the different time zones, coming up with a stream schedule, it's overwhelming. And of course, if you don't have MKU running during it, it gets tough, and all of it really starts to feel weird when you consider how many imbalanced matches there are. Now, I know a lot of people talk about, oh, World Cup, let's try to find ways to make it more balanced. And here's the thing, you can't. And it's because, the World Cup isn't really a fair tournament to begin with. And what I mean by that is some countries are just stronger than the others, and we can't do anything about that. With traditional MKU types of tournaments, there's a lot more you can talk about when it comes toward balancing teams. It's like, well, maybe this team shouldn't have all the best players and stuff. And it's like, yeah, fair, sure, I agree. But when it comes to, World Cup, it's like, well, you can't just tell USA to not use, the best players in the USA. Or you can't tell Japan to just, split into two teams so we can make that's stupid. The point of the World Cup is to figure out who the best country is, right? I mean, there were a lot of years where we probably could have said, Japan should probably be split because nobody's going to beat them. And it's like, well, France beat them last time, and, that was an epic moment, and that wouldn't have happened or had the same effect if Japan did split. Also, we don't want to, half-ass these tournaments also. We know it has a reputation, so if we want to host it, we want to make sure it's great. With 2021, talking with Endgame TV, that felt special, right? We had that announcement trailer that was out of left field because it hadn't happened the year before. It was a genuine, is it actually happening this year? It was cool, and we want to, have that same effect. We want people to feel like it's a special occasion when it happens, otherwise it kind of loses its luster to begin with. Overall, the hassle, it never truly feels worth it, even after a successful event. And like I mentioned, the staff team often feels dead afterwards. Still, the demand persists, and we want to do right by the people on our site and community. It's if people want World Cup, I see it in the suggestions. It's what kind of tournaments do you want to see? There's every once in a while always, going to be that World Cup comment. I think it's because it does have popularity and a reputation. But it's how do we do it in a way that's going to be interesting for spectators, not going to drain the staff team, not going to be too much of a hassle? And we have to really think about our answers here. Now, I think there are alternatives, and I'm going to talk about some of them, and they're likely going to be a little bit disappointing, because the things I'm going to recommend are going to sound like downgrades, quite frankly, because we've had World Cups where we've done literally everything possible to do things like host every match and make the perfect schedule and all that, and it is overwhelming. And if we want to balance it, potentially have them in future years, I think we really have to come up with answers. So here's a few things I would recommend. Personally speaking, I think we have to rework the entire schedule system to make it more compact, and I think a good way to do that is by having less of a focus on the stream. In my opinion, we should run, World Cup in 2 weekends if we could. Obviously, that's probably too little, but I think 3 is definitely achievable. Like last time, I think the top 8 teams should just be floated over. Like mentioned, there's a clear gap between them, and until otherwise proven, I don't think that those teams should really have to, spend time, working for, making it to the bracket phase. They're going to be there anyway. Let's not waste time. Whether or not the bracket phase is single or double elimination is a discussion worth having. I think that single elimination feels more like the actual World Cup. The thing about double elimination is it just gives, like, your tier 2 teams, that get beat by Japan or France or something like that. It gives them a chance to, prove that they should be seeded higher in future years when going up, against the lower end tier 1 teams or the other tier 2 teams. And you don't want to be locked out of finishing in the top 4 just because you drew a tougher opponent in the first round. Additionally, to speed things up, I would also just, finish games once they're mathematically over. In the group phase, I actually don't think that there should be a focus on casting at all. I would honestly want to knock it out in one weekend with a very compact schedule where everybody understands, like, hey, you're going to play a bunch this weekend, we're going to figure this out, we'll move on to the bracket in the second weekend. The bracket can maybe be 16 teams, kind of like, World Cup is right now. I think in the round of 16, just because, there's going to be a large projected winner. I think if you win game 1 by over 100, then you could just win the best of 3, to be honest, assuming it's a single elimination tournament. I would say that the stream, would kind of ramp up in the bracket phase, kind of jump around and during those matches, especially the top 8. As for actual stream content, though, you want to make sure people are still getting the spotlight, and I think a good way to do that would, to not have a dedicated stream team for it, but rather have a few people that are dedicated to, hosting personal streams or something. Kind of like designed to be like NFL Red Zone, where like certain people stream World Cup coverage and they jump around matches, find the close ones. Maybe you could even stagger each one by 15 minutes. You could have like start times at like 2:15 or 3:30. And like the goal of that would be, for there to always be a match that's close to finishing. So people that are, like kind of jumping around could always find something that's intense or something like that. So in summary, I think what needs to be really said is that the World Cup is not an easy project, and people got to realize that. And there's not always, a great competition at the end. You have like singular matches that are very amazing, I would say, but the hit rate isn't super high. In the past, a lot of people, would join the community because they saw the World Cup and that was really cool to them. But the numbers really haven't really suggested that a bunch of people join the community because of World Cup these days, but a lot of people just watch it. Last World Cup, we were featured on Ludwig's Twitch for a decent amount, right? And that's really cool. He's one of the biggest streamers out there, but it didn't move the needle like in a way that you would expect it to. I mean, that's a lot of exposure, but regardless of what we get out of the World Cup, if the community enjoys it, the community enjoys it. So I'd like to, ask people like, do you want to see the World Cup return? If so, do you have recommendations for it? Ideas? How do you think we should run the bracket? Do you like single elimination, double elimination? Would we be cool with, testing, like the 1 weekend group phase? Because I think there are a lot of ways that we can make it more efficient, less of a burden on staff, and still, have that great experience that everybody has come to love with representing their country and all that. Let me know in the comments what you think, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.